A few months ago, I did experiments with sugar versus no sugar in my dough. And what I learned was the sugar gave the dough more taste and more color, in addition to making it rise a little bit faster. If you take a look here, you can see the color difference. When I say more taste, it was actually just more flavorful. Like it wasn't necessarily a sweet flavor, it just was more flavorful because all the sugar is doing is feeding the yeast. It's like fertilizer for the yeast, basically. Now, ever since I started this channel, I've been getting recommendations about testing diastatic malt powder. So I finally gave in and did an experiment. From my understanding, initially, diastatic malt powder is basically doing the same thing sugar is, just in a little bit different, more complex, slower way. It's essentially assisting, aiding the fermentation process. So I was curious to see what the difference was. I wanted to do this one last experiment before I make Tony Geminani's complete recipe. He uses diastatic malt powder for his recipes to the tune of 2%. So I made two dough balls, one with my stock recipe with sugar, and then the other I replaced the sugar with the malt powder. I did 2% because that's what Tony calls for in his recipe, 2% malt powder. And so this is my first time ever touching this stuff, ever being around it. And so I opened it up and I put it in, and my first observation is that it smells horrible. It smells like really earthy, kind of a root smell. If you've ever had kava root before, it kind of smells like that. So I mixed it up and I let it set for about 30 minutes. Then I shaped a ball and put it in the fridge. And the whole time the dough just smelled horrible. I was nervous that I put too much in. I double checked my math. I went online and did some research, and it turns out that Tony calls for more malt powder than anybody else, any of the experts. The next highest expert, his recipe called for 1.5% malt powder, but I guess most recipes are like way below 1%. And so I was a little bit scared that my pizza dough was going to be horrible. Anyways, it sat in the fridge overnight. I took it out the next day, and surprisingly, it didn't smell bad anymore. It had a different fragrance. It smelled nutty. So that's what Tony said in his book, The Pizza Bible, is that the malt gives the crust a nutty flavor. And now I understood what he's talking about. It just takes a day or longer of fermenting to get the bad smell to go away and to make the dough smell nutty. So I should say initially, in addition to the strong smell of the malted dough ball, it was like also more sticky than normal than the other one, which isn't a huge deal, just an observation. So I took it out and I shaped my regular dough ball first, the one with sugar. And when I shaped the second one, the one with malt, or sorry, with the malt, it was stronger. It was noticeably stronger. It took a little bit longer to shape because of that, because it kept wanting to go back to its ball shape or the smaller circle shape. Again, I don't know if that's a pro or con. It's just an observation. The dough is definitely more elastic with the malt powder in there, which made me think. So yesterday I made both dough balls with olive oil. I've been kind of going back and forth, experimenting a little bit. The main pro that I saw in olive oil is that it makes the dough stronger. And so I'm thinking, I don't even know if you need olive oil if you're using diastatic malt, because the malt made the dough a lot stronger. I got to do a test on that now. I just keep going down rabbit holes every experiment I do. So I got to do that test. Anyways, I shaped it. Like I said, it's stronger. It took a little longer to shape. And I baked them both. And take a look. You can see here that the one with sugar has a tiny bit more color to it, actually. And if you look at those, there's like a few, 3 or 4 dark spots on the rim. That's actually just because the dough with sugar had some large air bubbles. And those large air bubbles just brown up a lot faster because the surface of the dough is so thin. But other than those brown spots, the crust looked really similar, maybe a tiny bit darker, but it was consistency-wise, it was like the same weight, strength, the same kind of rim, like the air bubbles were the same size in the rim. Very comparable, very comparable. Now, taste-wise, I was a little bit nervous still. I wasn't sure how this weird smelling dough was going to come out. But here's the good news is it actually tasted a little bit sweeter than the dough made with sugar. It didn't taste nutty to me. Like it smelled nutty. The dough smelled nutty. When I tasted it, it tasted a little sweeter. A little less of an aftertaste also. It just was a little bit sweeter. How much sweeter? I'd probably say it's like 5 to 10% sweeter than the dough made with sugar. In my opinion, it tastes a little better than the one made with sugar. Is that worth keeping a bag of diastatic malt around at all times? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, I probably want to experiment with like a smaller percentage just to see if I can make it last longer. Maybe 1% diastatic malt is good enough, or even less. I got to experiment with that now too. Another rabbit hole I got to go down. Because if you're doing 2%, this bag that I bought is actually going to go pretty fast. Because the stuff is like kind of lightweight by nature, so 2% was like a pretty big pile of malt I had to put in this. So that's the conclusion of my test. The diastatic malt smelled really bad at first in the dough the first day. Second day, it smelled nutty, but the cooked product, the cooked crust was sweeter than the dough with sugar, which in my opinion is better. If I had to choose one or the other to eat every day, I would choose the one made with malt. With that being said, is it that big of a deal? Yeah, probably not. I mean, if I ran out of diastatic malt, I don't think I'd rush online to order some more right away. Maybe I would. Maybe I would just go a while without it. Because, like I said, it was maybe 5 to 10% more flavorful, a little bit sweeter. So that's it. Let me know if you have any questions or comments. Thank you. I'd like to give a special shout out to Pizzori, my sponsors. They make some really great stuff. I've got their pizza still made of cast iron and their pizza cutter, which makes cutting the pizza just easier and faster. Appreciate their sponsorship.